Okay, welcome to another episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Dashi Miller here from Warrior Concepts. For those of you watching live, got a little bit of a late start because I decided to try a new or a different setup, and well, the best laid plans, right? Anyway, all right. So this week we're going to take a look at gyaku-waza, right? Hopefully there's not too much of a glare on the board. You can see this gyaku-waza. We're really looking at our shoulder locks, shoulder dislocations. We're gonna dive into some of these translations and things like that. But what I want to do is take a look at some things that we can do and we can remember to be able to do these things better. Okay, so we're covering 4 intermediate joint locks that, again, we're focusing on the shoulders. Okay, there's many different variations, many different names for these things. We're using 4 as they are presented in my program to my Mod 2 and my Mod 4 people, obviously beyond that as well, right? So here's the thing, right? Normally I start off by pointing out a problem that students have or whatever. The problem is that these are challenging techniques, right? There's certain things that you have to know about them to be able to hit them more often than you miss, okay? Everything from knowing that, just because somebody's small and whatnot, it's easier to get the lock on somebody, right? Or catch things, but it's harder to hold it because they're wiry, right? They can easily slip out of things and whatnot. They're uber flexible. It's generally how I pick my training partners, right? Because I want to find people that can easily slip out of things so that it forces me to get better. But either way, right? So if somebody's really thin and wiry, same thing with pressure points, right? It's easier to hit it, harder to keep it, okay? Pressure points are a little bit different, right? But if I'm dealing with somebody who's bigger and stronger, right, it's harder to get it because there's going to be more resistance, pound for pound or whatnot. But once you have it, it's easier to keep it, okay? But again, these are in the intermediate phase. They're certainly not simple things, okay? But first, we need to understand that this concept of kansetsu-waza, right? So we'll break these things down here a little bit. Where's my marker? There we go, okay? So kansetsu, gyaku-waza is a subset of kansetsu-waza. In Japanese, kansetsu means joint, all right? And waza means technique. I know this can be confusing because people will often say, well, I thought kata means technique. Now, see, splitting hairs and whatnot, but waza, what waza are, it's a technique, but it's how you go about doing something, right? So a kata is usually a string of waza, okay? So how, like uke nagash, right? What most people translate as blocking. This whole countering, parrying, you can use the term blocking. We did a whole Whiteboard Wednesday on these things, right? That's a waza, right? How do I do this thing that catches him, that captures him, that injures him, whatever. These things, right? These shoulder locks and dislocations and whatnot are waza, right? Here's how you manipulate the joint to make that happen. But you'd have a kata where he's throwing one or more punches or a kick or a grab. And I don't mean just a foundational thing where you're kind of setting up from a static position, right? That's more of a waza. What we're looking at with a kata is he's throwing multiple attacks and you're going to catch it, right? So you've got to neutralize things, you have to enter, then you have to catch things and move it to the limitation or the limits of its range of motion. And then here's the way you move that to be able to use leverage to break it apart, right? Kind of like taking a leg or a wing off of a chicken or a turkey carcass kind of thing, right? Yeah, it's kind of graphic, but that's the way it works. And if you want to practice and understand it better, I highly recommend. Christmas is coming up for you, and that's a holiday for you, or Easter or whatever, and you're working with something like this. Next time you're having chicken, get, half, full, whatever, and then practice understanding the way the joint goes together and how that can be manipulated. Anyway, so kansetsu-waza. Kansetsu is joint. So what's implied in here is this idea of locking, right? Nothing in the translation itself means locking, right? But kansetsu-waza, joint technique, right? We're not helping the guy move better, right? We're taking things away from him. So generally speaking, across martial arts, this implies locking, like in judo, aikido, those kind of things. Actually, the way I was taught these things was I was taught from the perspective of dislocation. So we'll take a look at these here in just a minute. But the first thing I want to take a look at, though, is to explore joint techniques. We need to understand joints in the body. Okay, so we have three primary types of joints, right? And the way the extremities, the way the limbs, arms and legs are attached to the body, three types of joints, they're in the same order, moving from torso out, okay? So what we have are ball and socket joints. Okay, we have hinge joints, like the hinge on your door, right? And we have universal joints. Oops, universal, okay? So ball and socket joints, shoulder, hip, okay? It's again, simplified drawing. What you have is basically a socket that's basically cup shaped, right? And then you've got this bone that sticks into it. So that's either going to be the end of the humerus for the upper arm bone, or it's going to be the head of the femur for the leg bone, right? And then you get a hinge joint, right? That's a weird hand, right? Right. So what you have is the elbow joint, right? Hinge joint, elbow joint, right? It's the elbow and the knee, okay? And then universal joint, again, I started this. I should probably not have done it, right? So what we're looking at is the ankle and the wrist, okay? So here's the way this works, right? Each one has a certain type or range of motion, okay? So if we look at these things from the perspective of strength, right? The strongest joints in our body. Now, this is size for size, and this is based on motion. We give up strength for range of motion. So those with the most limited range of motion are actually going to be stronger, right? So your strongest, let's just do it this way. Your strongest joints, right, are your hinge joints, your elbows and your knees. Not that they can't be broken, locked, and all that kind of stuff, but there's a limited range of motion, right? So if somebody misses that, it's easy for them to escape and whatnot, right? But there's only one primary range of motion. And often people will say, no, Sensei, I can lift my elbow, okay? So it can move that way. No, the shoulder is doing that part. The hinge joint only does this, right? Trying to do that anywhere off that plane changes things, right? Next strong, okay, are your ball and socket joints, okay? Much greater range of motion, but there's a certain limitation to it. And then your universal joints, your wrist and your ankles, are the weakest joints that you have. And it's not because they're the smallest one, it's because, right, we give up strength for range of motion, right? I don't have to move the rest of my arm to do all of this with my wrist, okay? So what we're taking a look at today is how to attack the ball and socket joint, because anytime you're working any kind of techniques, what you have to understand is what you're attacking, right? And to understand the nature of it, what makes it strong, what makes it weak, and if you can understand how it goes together, all the better, okay? So let's do this, right? I have another anatomy book, but it's just a bunch of cadavers and stuff, and the pictures are smaller. But we'll just pull this one up here quickly, right? So get in here closer so you can see this little guy right here, okay? So one of the first things my teachers in this art told me was best ninja manual you're going to find on the market is a Gray's Anatomy or something that's very, very graphic so you can understand how it goes together. So you can see into this, right? What you see, this is the scapula in the back, right? What most people call the shoulder blade. So we're looking at the front of the shoulder, okay? So this is in the back, and then this clavicle comes in here and creates the AC joint, right? Creates this socket, right? And then this is the humerus, right? It's not funny, right? Everybody calls it the funny bone, right? But it comes up here, and then it seats in here. So if you can see what's going on, right, all the structure to hold it or to reinforce it, like scaffolding, is behind. Okay, it's a little bit on top with this collarbone that comes over and sits on top a little bit, right? But it's all soft tissue holding this all together. And then what keeps this from falling out forward is there's two bands, right? Now this is just the skeletal stuff, but there's two bands that come across at the front in kind of an X shape. Again, you do your own research and look this stuff up, right? But these two bands that cross in front right here to keep this from falling out, okay? So if you understand that, then you start to understand that the locks and whatnot that we're doing to the shoulder joint is really leverage, right? It's kind of like a crowbar kind of action. I'll show you a couple of different ways that they work, but what we're really doing is applying pressure or manipulation on the humerus, right? Using the humerus in a way that, because of the shape of the head of the humerus and the way the socket, right, that whole thing goes together, what you're actually doing is applying pressure to these bands right here. And when it's applied just right, one or both of them will tear free of their anchor points, and then the head of the humerus drops into the torso, into the chest cavity. I mean, not like way far down, but if you've ever seen somebody who's has a dislocation, right, it's not being held in place by anything. And it's not because the bones aren't there. Could be, they could have been in a really terrible accident and stuff broke back here, but more often than not, right, this stuff gets torn, okay? And that's where looking into things like the difference between sprains, strains, and dislocations come in, right? And then you typically have 3 categories of each one, depending on the severity of the overstretching of the muscles or the ligaments, or them being slightly torn or completely ripped off. Okay, so that's really what we're looking at, right? Now, do you need to know the anatomy? No, but I believe that it helps. Okay, so anyway, make sure my notes are all together here. Okay, so again, types of joints, basic strength idea behind them, right? Just think range of motion. The greater the range of motion, the weaker the joint, but also, right, we can do more with it, okay? So we can do more with this one, do a little less with this one, right, but still a lot, and then we can do less with this. What really gives us the abilities that we have is, right, all 3 of them, right, all together, so we can do all kinds of cool, funky things, right? Okay, so that leads us into gyaku-waza, right? So gyaku-waza are a subset, right, of kansetsu-waza, joint locks, okay? So, if we think about joint locks, we can lock finger joints, we can lock the elbow, all those kind of things, right? But where are we going with this? Okay, so gyaku itself, the word gyaku means reversal. Okay? It means to reverse something. And waza, again, is technique, okay? So gyaku-waza, reversal techniques. It can also imply like a tricky reverse, okay? Not that you're being tricky, but you're reversing something in a way or in a direction that it's not really built for. And that again, we keep coming back to this, right? So if we understand how that works, great, okay? So when we're looking at this idea of reversing based on the way the joint's made, based on limitations, based on range of motion and all that, what we end up with is, again, 3 levels of severity, okay? So we can use gyaku-waza or any kansetsu-waza, but in this case, again, we're focusing on shoulders. So gyaku-waza, level of severity, okay? Because we don't always have to break it, okay? I remember when I first started out, and maybe you have had the same thing going on. We grow beyond these things or whatever. But when I first started, based on other training, based on other self-defense training, based on other teachers and the way they presented things and whatnot, things were either like you're not doing anything or you're doing everything, right? And then I got involved in this stuff. And again, I'm still holding on to that, right? So if we were doing a wrist reversal or a wrist lock or a wrist twist, whatever you want to call it, right? there was always this idea of taking the guy down. And then I encounter kata in, this lineage or that lineage or whatever, where we're applying a gyakute, right? A wrist reversal, only to screw him up and position his body so that I can bring a toe stab up to kick him in the kidney or something like that, right? So it's not an all or nothing thing. And again, I just mentioned this with my class last night. If we go by the numbers and we think about options, right, and choices and things that we can choose from, the greater the number of options that we have in any given moment, right? And this is not just martial arts, this is life too. The greatest number of options that we have, or the more options we have, the greater our chances of success, okay? So if we think about this, somebody that says, I ain't got no choice, okay? Well, that's not true, right? Everybody has at least one choice, but that's still really limited, right? Because anybody that has zero choices is dead. Only dead people have no choice, okay? Well, what I meant was I only had one choice. Now, you have one option that you could see, but we got to grow beyond that very, very quickly, because if you only ever have one choice, right, you have no choice. Do it, right, or you're going to die, punished, whatever, okay? The only people that only have one choice, right, and that's not true either, but either way, right, we call them slaves, okay? Two choices, we have a dilemma. But for most people, you don't really have two choices. But again, if we can only see two, then, right, but having two choices is what? If they're both equally bad, equally good, right, we call that a dilemma, because people lock up. I don't know which one to choose, okay? But the reality is we always have a third choice in there, which is to not choose at all. Well, I can't not choose, man. I'll get in trouble. Well, see, now you're back to being a slave, okay? But this dilemma thing, right? And again, if you're one of my Mikyo students, and we haven't gotten there yet, okay, if you think dilemmas are bad, in Mikyo we have quadlemmas. Okay, so but it's only when you have three or more options in any given moment that you approach real freedom. So the way your training works is we should always be able to see or have three options or more in any given situation, which increases and improves our chances of success. But we're always limiting him to no more than three choices in any given moment. Okay, never leave somebody with zero choices. Okay, they'll fight like a freaking banshee, and you got major problems. Okay, but what we have here is there's three severity levels, right? When we're doing gyaku-waza, okay? And again, focusing on the shoulders, right? But any joint, okay? So we can use it as a manipulation, right? I just described that with that wrist reversal, right? I'm using the wrist reversal to get this guy into a weird position so I can lift a knee or a toe stab or something to attack a different target. It's a setup for something else, okay? So I'm manipulating him into a different position. Right? So I'm not necessarily looking to lock it, break it, or whatever. I just need it there for a quick second to move him around. Okay. The next one would be as a lock or an immobilization. Okay. Some people say pin. Okay. It's a pin. It's a restraint. It's a whatever. Okay. But what we're looking here is taking it to its extreme, to where what you really are getting is a pain or a fear compliance kind of thing, because what's really going on is he's not willing to do what he has to do to regain freedom to be able to stay in the fight. And that thing is to purposefully break his own joint. Okay. And that's upper level stuff. But if you get to that point and you understand it, then you understand that the only thing that's going to stop you in a joint lock is complying with it. And what you're doing is you're moving yourself around to keep this thing from breaking, to keep it intact. But if you just helped it break it, right? Yes, it takes that limb out of the fight, but the rest of you, the other 95%, is back in the fight, right? And then you can get it fixed later. Okay. Hatsumi Sensei, my teacher, was asked one time, what happens if somebody were to put you in the perfect joint lock, right? where if you move, it will break. And he just smiled and he said, then I break my own joint and I kill them. And then I go get myself fixed. Okay. But again, we all have our limitations, right? Okay. So there's manipulation, there's lock or immobilization, and then taken to its full extent, which I was just talking about, right, is dislocation. Right? You break it free. You break those bands or whatever the structural mechanism that holds it together. You break that, and now it just hangs free. They lose. They don't lose function. Well, yeah, they do lose function, right? They lose control of it because the connectors that make it move aren't attached, or really important ones aren't attached. Okay, so when I learned these things. I keep seeing these things online listed as shoulder locks, as manipulations and things like that. When this stuff was introduced to me, it was introduced as a dislocation. Okay, we had shoulder dislocations. Because if I learn it to that extent, these are fallbacks or additional control mechanisms. But if I only learn it as a manipulation or I only learn it as a lock, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can take it full on. Right, that I can actually do a full dislocation, right? By being able to do something to its full extent, backing down is easier than learning something at a low extent and then thinking that or assuming that you can just jack it up. It's kind of like people that do soft training and that's how they do their strikes, but they never practice their strikes against really firm targets and they never practice breaking things and making sure that their strikes have bite, okay? If I train so that my strikes have bite, it's very easy to back that down, right? And I just have to put less energy into it, right? Less intent, those kind of things. But right, the last thing I want to do is make the assumption that because I can do things slowly and softly, that all it's going to take is for me to jack up the energy. And then because resistance training and target hitting and whatnot, it doesn't just condition the fist so it doesn't bruise as much when you hit and all that kind of stuff. You're also teaching yourself where to hit and why, and where not to hit and why, right? Because last thing and the last place you want to find out that you're not striking correctly is in a self-defense situation where when you do it, your hand breaks, okay? Or you miss and you break your ulna or whatever, okay? So anyway, right? So again, I was taught full of dislocation. Again, everything else is easier, okay? So let's do this. Again, we're focusing on the ball and socket joint. So we already took a look at how it kind of goes together, right? You get the head of the humerus that kind of sits in here, and then this thing can kind of move around. If you're a mechanic or you've done any work on cars and whatnot, right, there are ball joints. There are things like that where a beam goes in, right? There's a ball on it, then there's this socket, and so there's a certain range of motion that it can go through, okay? So let's see. All right, so let's do this. We're going to take a look at types and range of motion. Oh, I just left the screen. I hate jumping in front of the whiteboard, but I think I'm going to have to go back to my old setup last week, or that I normally use. So anyway, right? So if we think about the types of movement and the ranges that we have, right? We have this lifting and swinging, right? So lifting forward, swinging back, that kind of thing, right? Okay. So we have, what do I have here? Yeah. Okay. So we have this lifting, dropping. Okay. It's basically a swinging motion. Okay. It's like a pendulum. Okay. It's just this pendulum, right? For those of you in the art, right, you recognize this thing, right? Okay. So, but this has a certain limitation to it, right? We can lift the arm, we can swing the arm and lift because everything's open in the front. We can lift way farther to the front than we can to the back because the humerus, this arm bar right here, right, is going to hang up on the scapula, on the shoulder blade, right? Runs into the back of the ball, the AC joint, right? So we can only go so far, right? And for anybody that says, no, I can go farther than that, what they're probably doing is turning their body, which means that they're moving the face of that scapula out of the way. But now, are they really doing this, or are they doing this? Because that's different, right? You can lift it up and out to the side as well, right? And you can also drop, right? But limitations there are, can only go so far, but the joint's still wide open, okay? Again, we need to understand limitations. Out to the side, unless I pitch my shoulders, we run into a range thing here, unless we do something weird. See, now it's out front. See that? Okay. If it's out to the side, right? And so this is one of those things that we were told to do, right? Okay. The instructions, of course, this was in the 80s, very early 80s, right? So it was okay to say, play with yourself. We all still giggled, right? But that's the idea, right? You don't need to have a partner to figure out what the range of motion on your joints are. Okay. So we have that. We have rotational. Okay. So rotational is where, right, you're rolling it around in the joint this way. Okay. And again, because you've got these flexible bands in the front, it goes more forward. Okay. You see that? Even though the head of the humerus can start to come out here, right? I can go more forward and turn my hand, thumb down, and even behind myself a little bit, right? I can even move the joint, right? But I want to stay on one line. Okay. So if I put my arm straight out in line with my shoulders and flip it over, okay, I can get it way farther this way than I can this way, which is why when we're learning wrist reversals, this is taught first because it's easier to get the lock if they're adjusting with their arm. Okay. Ultimately, what we want to do is take the elbow and the shoulder out of the equation so that they're stuck with this. But even if this is connected, right, it doesn't go as far. So we start affecting the spine and the shoulder joint and all that way earlier than when we do an ura-gyaku, right? They can go way farther. Okay. And then the other one is side cross body kind of things, right? Side, let's see, cross body, right? So now what we're looking at is taking it out and bringing it across, okay? What we run into here is a limitation because of musculature, right? We've got pec muscles, we've got bicep and whatnot. So that'll kind of cause things to run out. So we have to catch and pull to help open things up out to the side, right? It barely goes past unless we cheat it, right? So we're not talking about cheating it, okay? If you're trying to apply a shoulder lock and he can maneuver that way, then you're missing some other pieces. You haven't locked him down so that you can attack the shoulder joint, okay? Your ability to attack any given joint is based in large part on how immobilized you make the rest of him, okay? Like, wrist only goes this far unless he lifts his elbow, which is the shoulder joint, in which case, and then he twists around, right? It goes way far. Well, the wrist joint doesn't go way far, but he has this thing, right? So what we want to do, one of the rules of kansetsu-waza, right, joint locking techniques, one of the rules is to attack any joint, you have to remove the other two in the sequence. Okay, but if I'm attacking the shoulder, right, I already have the arm. So what's involved with the shoulder? Well, see, there's other joints, right? Your primary joint in your body is your hip, your waist. Okay, so if he can manipulate and move the spine and the hips or the other shoulder, then you got a problem. Okay, so I'm not covering those today, but what we have are these different types and range of motion. Okay, so we need to understand what they are so that we can make these things work. Okay, so again, somebody can go way far this way, right? But if we do something to rotate the arm out, kind of in wave position, see it, right? Now taking that elbow farther doesn't work the same. Okay, if it's forward, so how far you can go with that. Okay, but if you take it out to the side and then take the humerus and lift it straight up, not so far. Okay, take something behind, right? If it's out here, he can move around a lot, right? But if we keep it really close to his body, him turning doesn't work so well, right? And we only need to go a little ways. It's not very far, right? Before the head of the humerus is punching into those bands that are right here and forcing him forward. Okay, so out to the side, what we have to do is apply pressure to the elbow, right? So when people think about arm bars, they're focusing on the elbow, right? If you want to focus on the elbow, then just very quickly smash through the elbow before this has a chance to adjust, so you blow the elbow out. But most arm bars use the elbow to attack the shoulder, okay? Muso dori, we're going to cover that in a minute. Okay? Muso dori applies pressure to the back of the elbow, but it's forcing the head of the humerus forward. Okay, so we have to understand what a technique is doing. This in Japanese, this is one of the 3 or 4 key principles that we're trying to learn, which is kotsu. Okay, kotsu means essence or essential nature, right? What's the purpose? What does that waza, what does that technique do to the body structure? What does that technique do with psychological warfare? What does that do with his mental processes? How does it make him think? How does it guide his consciousness around? That kind of thing, right? Otherwise, it's just monkey moves, okay? And we need to get way past monkey moves, right? Because we need to have an advantage. And the way to have an advantage from the ninja's perspective is to know more about a thing that you're dealing with than your competitor, than your opponent. If you know more, then you're going to be paying attention to more, identifying more, recognizing more, and using more than he even knows is going on, okay? One of the reasons why these things are hit and miss so much for new students is because they're watching the step-by-step, but they don't understand what's going on inside the uke's body. They don't understand how the joint's being manipulated. They're just watching what's being done to the arm, but they don't get this piece, okay? So get past that. Okay, all right, let's move on to the last part right here, where we're going to be taking a look at these 4 shoulder locks that we introduce students to. Again, they're intermediate techniques. So students get, what do they get? They get 2 of these. They get introduced to 2 of these in our module 2. So they've been in training 6 to 9 months by the time they get these. But then we revisit them and we add 2 more and a variation or 2 in mod 4. So at that point, they're, depending on when they get it, 9 months to a year out from earning their shodan. Okay. All right. So very, very quickly for these things, right? So we have muso dori. Okay. We have musha dori. Okay. So muso dori, musha dori. We have onikudaki. Might be nice if I spelled right. Onikudaki. And we have ogyaku. Right? I'm spelling it hopefully so that you'll be able to pronounce it correctly, because otherwise that would just be an O, but it could be an O-U, whatever, okay? So muso dori, nothing alike catch. Musha dori, warrior catch. Onikudaki, crushing the demon, crushing the devil, devil crusher. Ogyaku, big reversal. Okay, so I'm just going to demonstrate quickly with my arms. So those of you who are visual and maybe not, maybe you don't know the names or whatever, you can associate with these. But what I want to do is I want to take the arm motion and match it to the limitations, right? To the range of motion that's going on in here. Okay, and where the limitations are and what's going on. And then we're going to break this down because I want to take a look at things from a tactical standpoint, right? And maybe a strategic standpoint, but a tactical standpoint. But what we're going to do is take a look at it from the perspective of range, because if you screw up the range, a technique, you have a harder time making the technique work. And then the motion, which way are we going? And then what you'll find is that these 4 are actually grouped in 2 sets of 2. There's going to be 2 ranges and 2 motions, and we'll see how these things go together. Because if you understand that part and you're intermediate to advanced, then you can start to understand throw flow, where if I start to apply something and he goes to escape, he almost always puts himself into one of the other ones for you, or he goes in that direction. And if you know what's going on, you just shift from the one you're on to the one he's doing, right? So you can have that kind of, I don't know if you've ever had a cat or if you understand how asshole cats are, right? Cats will, do something or whatever, make a mistake, but they'll look at you like, yeah, I meant that. Okay. The mascot for Ninja is a cat, okay? Because the whole idea is we're problem solvers and we're very adaptive. So whatever goes on, yeah, I'm good with that. Okay. Life changes, situations change, whatever. Yeah, that was good, right? He escapes from your lock or whatever, and you catch him some other way. Just look at him like nothing's disturbed you, or you actually verbally say, thanks, that's actually better. That's what I was looking for. Thank you very much, right? Which is a real spirit breaker, because who wants to be told that the cool thing they tried to do that backfired on them was actually the thing that you wanted them to do, right? So anyway, right, so musodori, right, typically called an armbar, right? And here's a key indicator. Here's a key alignment for all of these things, okay? You guys will be able to watch the recording, okay? So I didn't plan on covering this this time, but let's do this. The key indicator, or the easy way to do this from a structural standpoint, is to create a line that's has 3 dots on it, and they're all connected in one linear line, right? Because anatomically straight is different than geometrically straight, okay? So if I put my arm out straight without torquing my shoulder, I'm going to turn sideways. See, my shoulder's on the other side of this one, see it? Okay, but my arm is positioned almost like I'm wrapped around a big beach ball. Because if I put my hand on line with the 2 shoulders, this scapula, this shoulder blade, is now digging into my rib cage. So anatomically straight is not geometrically straight. Okay? Put your arms out to the side. Right? Hira is this way, okay? But it's not in line with the shoulder. But if you remember those index points, and you remember something I'm going to give you that has to do with an elbow or a hand, and depending on the technique, it's going to depend on whether it's elbow or hand, right? Your number 1 and number 2 points, making that big enough for you guys to see. Let's see. Yeah, good. Okay. So your number 1 and your number 2 points are his 2 shoulders. So unless he's already dislocated, they're fixed. Okay. So they're already creating the line. And then what you're going to do is put either the elbow or the hand on that line, because that forces the humerus back farther than the joint is designed for. Okay, and you already start to catch it. Okay, and this isn't just for shoulder. This isn't just for shoulder things. This is also for your gyaku-waza. Okay, if I'm doing koppo jutsu affecting the skeleton, then twisting this out here, he can move in. Okay, but if I walk this hand out in line with the shoulders, he can't turn around that, because the humerus is now jammed into the skeleton, and it's creating a barrier. It's creating a barricade. Okay, so interesting stuff, right? Again, takes the guesswork out of where am I supposed to go, right? Because people go through the motions and they pay attention to how their arms are on his arm or whatever, or they might be paying attention to their footwork, but they're not paying attention to the line they're on relative to their attacker's body. So I just gave you a line: shoulder, shoulder, and then your 3rd point of reference is either going to be the elbow or the hand on the side that you're affecting. okay? And we'll look at these as we go, okay? All right, so muso dori, right? Remember what we said out here, okay? Muso dori runs out this way, and then if we flip it up and around, what's happening? I don't know if you can see this or not, but the head of the humerus bulges out into the chest wall. It pushes against the chest wall. It's normally designed to be this way, okay? As a matter of fact, we do this in class, and I give students a little exercise that they'll just have their partner's arm out this way, and they'll be holding it, and then just take a fist or a boshiken and jam in around the shoulder socket, okay? And it's irritating, right? You have to hit it really, really hard to hurt it. But if you get this out to the side and get this in the right position where this sticks out, when you hit it with the boshiken or with a fist, it brings one of these nerves that come out and go into the arm right at the crown. So it presents this kyusho, and then it's just right there. So you know you have it because muso dori, nothing alike. And I know there's lots of other translations for this, but muso, no action, okay? Nothing alike, okay? One, no action. There's not a whole lot that I need to do to create this, but I'm also creating a situation where he can't move, okay? Because he can't get at me, because he can't get through this. If his shoulder's seated well, that's easy. If you have muso dori, and the indicator is that the head of the humerus is in the chest wall, it's forward. So when he turns to get you, he runs right into, it's like having a hanbo or a staff pointing right at him, where he can't turn directly into it. He has to go around it to try to unlock that, okay? So there's this catch, right? But what I'm doing is I'm applying pressure to the elbow, keeping the hand going backwards, elbow going forward, so it drives this forward, okay? Muso, right? So what I'm looking at doing, and with muso, it doesn't matter if you're doing the elbow or the hand. I don't think about either one, but ultimately they're both on this line. So shoulder to shoulder, right? Here's my arm, anatomically straight. But if I take it out in line with my shoulders, I'm literally stretching this open. I can get it there, but you see how my upper back, I don't know if you can see that or not, my upper back starts to arch, starts to go concave, okay? Because that's what we're going for, okay? So muso dori, right? Okay, musha dori, warrior catch, okay? It's arm still out to the side. I demonstrated this earlier. You drop the elbow, the hand is on line with the shoulders. See it? Shoulder, shoulder, hand. And then you're going to scoop that elbow up, keeping it as close to the torso as possible, right? So it forces the head of the humerus back into the AC joint. The muso dori forces the head of the humerus forward out of the joint. The musha dori forces it back into the joint, right? Which causes the same area on the back. On all of these, the same middle upper back. There's two vertebrae, right? This junction, you got T8, right? T stands for thoracic. T9, these vertebrae, okay? And then there's a disc in here, okay? What I was taught by Isuke Sensei, actually after I was in an accident and created a bulging disc, and he went, this is wonderful, I can show you something, right? All of these shoulder dislocations, all of your wrist reversals, all that kind of stuff, if you're applying it based on Koppo Jutsu, all backfire on that spot right there. It makes the back arch. When most people arch their back, they do it from the thoracic lumbar connection here. What this does is pushes your thoracic forward, and you'll know that you have it right because the center of his sternum, there's a joint right here, the center of his sternum goes forward and up. Okay, cool little index points, right? Okay, anyway, me and my little artwork, okay? So musha dori, catching this way. Onikudaki, crushing the devil. Again, arm is up and out to the side. Shoulder, shoulder, elbow. If the elbow is down or forward, that's why when you crank on this, he can turn in on you. So first thing we have to do is walk that elbow out See, it's in musodori position, but it's bent. And now we're going to hold this in place and lever the upper arm so that the upper arm rotates in that ball and socket joint. We're doing this just to this section of arm. I always call it the Model T crank, right? Okay. So in this case, with onikudaki, shoulder, shoulder, elbow, because the hand's up here. In mushadori, shoulder, shoulder, hand, because the elbow's down here. Okay. Musodori, shoulder, shoulder, elbow, hand. Okay. And then ogyaku is the exception to the rule. There's always exceptions to the rule, right? So ogyaku, the trick is to keep his arm as close to his torso as possible, because if you let it drift out, it allows for the arm to do this. We can do this very easily, right? But see the angle that it's on? Remember when I showed that earlier? Range of motion this way, range of motion runs out here. Out here is really where the ball and socket joint excels. That's why we're able to do uke nagash and things like that, right? Okay. But if we keep it very close to his shoulder, we keep him from turning in, right? We force the shoulder down and lift the hand up. It runs out right here, but we're just going to keep sinking. We're going to keep driving the shoulder down and lifting the hand straight up. Okay. So this is the only one that violates this, because we've got shoulder, shoulder, and then the arm, elbow, and hand are directly in line with that shoulder, right up against the torso. So if you've ever tried doing ogyaku and the person can slip out of it, it's because while you were doing it, they were able to move away from their arm and open that shoulder joint up. Okay, so cool thing, right? So we've got these 4 basic ones. And again, if he can manipulate that shoulder, he can get out of this. So the trick is in controlling during entering. Because remember, any technique has a minimum 3 parts to it. I'm really big on this 3 things, right? Because in the Gyoko school, there's a primary principle: 3 and 1, 1 and 3. Everything you should be able to break out into at least 3 different aspects. And the 1 and 3 is a singular principle that holds at least 3 things together. Actually holds more than 3, but you start looking for them, right? So any kata, right, has minimum 3 points. We have entering, called iri, right? How do I get inside his defenses to be able to take him? And then we have execution, right? And then we have follow-up. And the follow-up could be the throw. It could be a pin and a restraint. It could be that slamming thing where execution was I hit it, like Ichimonji no kata or whatever, and he drops. So I might end up backing out. I might end up backing, whatever, right? To maintain control or to regain control of space and whatnot at the end of it, okay? But most people want to jump to this. They want to go straight to execution, and they're really crappy at entering. And at this level, at the intermediate level for these things, you've got to be really, really good at the entering, because the entering positions the hand or the elbow on line with the 2 shoulders and already starts affecting the back, so that he can't, if you get that arch in the upper back, he can't manipulate his body to free the shoulder. It's where you're trying to do things too early, and he can move his spine. Okay, so we've got to be really, really good at this level for these things, and we have to understand: seize the spine, immobilize the feet. When we do that, then executing on the technique to blow that shoulder apart or to lock it or restrain it, whatever. Okay, but it's all on entering. Okay, so ultimately, what we have to do is learn how to prioritize. Okay, all right. So let's throw this last little piece of bonus on here. Okay, so musodori, armbar lock, call it whatever you want. Okay, it is what? We're way out away from the arm, right? We're at the hand and the elbow. So we're way far away from his body. So this is long range. Okay? Yes? And the motion is what? It's levering to push that forward. The motion is forward, where you're bringing the elbow joint up, rolling the arm into this position, and then levering on it. So we're rolling the shoulder joint forward. Okay? Mushadori, we're in this position. Shoulder, shoulder, hand, levering up, scooping that up. Hatsumi Sensei, and I'm still working on this. A bunch of years ago, he showed us how to, like, when you do this thing, right? When you get it in and you've got it and it's deep, but you're still not like, right? You're going to tear the shoulder apart. But here's this really cool thing with this, right? Because you're levering against the shoulder blade, against the scapula, whenever he did this, I could feel my scapula skip over a couple of ribs like this. Don't, okay? It's the most disconcerting feeling, okay? But if you go in deeper, you can use the scapula to break through the ribs. Split the rib cage right here. So now this doesn't have to dislocate. When you split the rib cage right here, now there's no support around the organs. Okay? The rib cage isn't attached anymore at the point where it connects here and connects at the spine. Down here, it connects to the spine, but it's called a floating rib because it doesn't attach to the sternum, right? But you break that free, and then the whole structure is broken. You're not just breaking a bone. Well, you're breaking the bones, but you're breaking the bones of the cage, right? That encapsulates everything and everything else is attached to, right? So you got a problem, okay? But what are we doing here, okay? I'm going to be really, really close to him. His elbow's really close to his body. My arm's right here. So we're almost shoulder to shoulder, right? So this is close range, okay? And we're scooping it up, which rolls the head of the humerus backwards in the joint. So the motion is backward, okay? Onikudaki, we're out here, right? So now I'm in a position where I am, here's his shoulder, here's his elbow. I got one arm here and I got one arm here. So I'm positioned right here, right? Out of range. So I'm farther away from him, okay? Not as far as Musodori, but I'm farther out here, and then this is getting cranked this way, okay? So now, right, what we have is a long range, right? And which way we're rotating it? Backwards, right? Backwards, right? And then old Gyaku, we're right in against him, right? I've got him by the clothing or by the joint itself, and I've got his straightened arm this way. I'm right beside him. I'm shoving down on this, and I'm rotating that up so it's on my shoulder. He's literally right here, okay? So close range. And I'm rolling the shoulder which way? Forward, right? So what we find is that if we can start making connections, right? We've got this unified thing with the exception of one of them, right? Where it's going to be in here really, really close. I guess it's in line, right? Because the hand and shoulder, hand and elbow are actually stacked on top of the shoulder. They can't be out to the side. So they're going to be in line. It's just, it doesn't form a straight line this way. It forms a straight line this way. So I guess the rule still applies, right? But we don't have a straight line out. We have an L, right? Okay. But what we end up having is a long range and a close range technique that roll the joint forward. And we have a long range and a close range technique that roll the joint back. Here's the cool thing. If I'm doing onikudaki, right, and he slips that and drops his elbow low to save it, he puts himself in mushadori position. If I have an onikudaki and he turns to straighten out his arm, I have him in a musodori position. Okay? If he turns too far, I have him in an ogyaku position. Okay? If we're doing mushadori and he straightens out his arm, we're in musodori position. If we're doing mushadori and he lifts that elbow up to save himself, we're in onikudaki position. See where I'm going with this? Okay? Because for folks that are heading to Shodan and folks that are heading to Nidan and partly into Sandan, you need to get really good at what I call throw flow, which is understanding that any technique that seems like it's failing is really the setup for something else. You need to know how, okay? Again, that's for my personal guys. If you're not one of my personal students, you're gonna do whatever your teacher told you, or you're gonna do whatever you want, okay? But anyway, that's why I had this today, okay? So got a little twist here. I know this says Friday virtual training, and I didn't have the time to change all this stuff. As I'm recording this, so if you're watching this after, we'll call it December 21st of 2023, none of the rest of this matters, okay? We normally do this Friday virtual training class that springboards off of our Whiteboard Wednesday training, okay? Except that this Friday, right, because of our upcoming Christmas holiday, tomorrow, December 21st, is the last day for classes here at the Academy because we have our end of the year Christmas holiday party on Friday the 22nd. So last class is tomorrow, Friday, and then I'm off for a week. I'll probably still do a Whiteboard Wednesday for you next week. But between Christmas and New Year's, there are no classes here at the Academy. So what I decided to do so that people could still get the training for this and then not hold it off into 2024 and then people forgot what the hell we talked about, right? Friday class, you're still going to go to this Friday virtual training class, but it's tomorrow at 6 p.m. Okay, so instead of it being on Friday at 6, it's Thursday at 6, right? And it's marked on the page, okay? But we're going to be going through these techniques, and because it's a regular class and because there's a wide range of student levels, and we'll see who shows up because it's Christmas holiday coming up, right? Hopefully there's plenty in there so that on video you'll get a chance to see typical mistakes that are made, because one, you'll see the mistakes, and two, I can explain how to fix it, okay? And how to get back into play, all right? But again, kansetsu-waza, just generally joint techniques. Gyaku-waza is a subset, right? Gyaku means to reverse. We're reversing the strength and alignment of that position, right? Understand the physical alignment that really starts to make it work, okay? And then ranges of motion, types of motion, different things you can do with the gyaku-waza, right? We can do it as a manipulation just to get him moving. We can lock it or create an immobilization. And this only works because he's worried about shit breaking, okay? If he's one of us, not worried about shit breaking because he's just going to purposely break it and hopefully try to kill you, right? But dislocation, my suggestion, same as my teachers gave me, was you always aim for being able to do the worst because you can always back it down. Please make sure you practice to back it down as well. Otherwise, there's a jail cell waiting for you somewhere, okay? So dislocation, those kind of things. The 4 intermediate ones, there's actually a variation of onikudaki. There's an omote version, there's an ura version. There's 3 different versions of mushadori that I teach people all the way to Nidan. One is that general one I just showed you. One is the way it was originally invented when they were in armor, and then one is an inside-out version of it, right? Musodori, there's a whole bunch of ways to catch that from underneath, from out to the side, whatever. But it's ultimately people. This is the biggest confusion for most people because they're touching the elbow and they're applying pressure to the elbow, so they think it's an elbow technique. But it's not an elbow technique. We're doing that to the elbow because we're attacking the shoulder, right? So in ninjutsu, this is where I'm going to round things out. Never forget that in ninjutsu, nothing is ever what it looks like. That's what keeps him from being able to frickin' beat it, because he'll be wrong. He'll be trying to defend himself because he'll be fighting the wrong thing. When this guy fights with his elbow to keep me from pressing on it, he actually creates more leverage that goes into his shoulder. So, but if you're attacking what he feels like you're attacking, the human body's instinctive reaction is to resist against that thing, right? We're built for natural caveman self-defense, which is you don't get to break what it is that you're trying to break, okay? All right, that's it. That's what I have for this time. I know we went slightly over an hour. I apologize. But if I don't talk to you between now and the new year, right, have a good holiday. If in whatever way you celebrate. Also, if you're one of my normal folks and whatnot, we have our Kuden podcast on Mondays, Mondays at 8 Eastern Standard Time. So if you're normally in on those, I said I was going to announce this past Monday, this past episode, there will be a Christmas evening and a New Year's evening, not Eve, right? Not the 31st, not the 24th, right? The day of, I'm going to keep the podcast going. So I have appropriate themes already played out for Christmas night, right? The 25th. It's, New Year's and Christmas always fall on the same calendar day in the year. So this year it happens to be Mondays, and I didn't want to have to skip over and have 3 weeks go by between one episode and another. So if you follow in on the Kuden podcast, again, if you're listening to this after the start of 2024, it's not going to matter. Okay. But we're going to keep things going. I've already rearranged my schedule. All the family stuff will be taken care of long before I do that. But I'm a big fan of consistency and integrity and just keeping things moving. So Christmas night, December 25th, 2023, there will be a Kuden podcast episode, and Monday evening, January 1st, New Year's Day, that evening, 8 p.m. Eastern, right? There will be a podcast that will be literally, cheesy word, right? Kicking off 2024, right? So hopefully I'll see you for some of these things, but if not, I'll see you into the new year. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe. I'll talk to you next time.